Hello, everybody. This is Jake Westrom, and this is our first literary theory, post-colonialism. Before we start, I want to point out that there are several that we're going to be doing for college composition, and none of them are made up out of whole cloth before you start asking. I borrowed information on all of these from the Purdue Owl. Now, to get to its most general, post-colonialism is essentially the racism lens. You use post-colonialism when you are looking at issues of race and how it relates to power. Basically, how does a person of a certain ethnicity hold control or is controlled? And that can be in many ways, from overt racism to much more subconscious things such as economics or sexuality or things like that. Now, there are a whole series of questions that you ask when you talk about post-colonialism. The first question, if you're using a post-colonial theory, is how does the text that you are looking at represent different aspects of colonialism? Simply put, how is the white guy in charge? How is the black guy not in charge? I am really, really oversimplifying it. What person or group does the work identify with as other or stranger, as in something different from the norm, and how are they described or treated? What does the text reveal about the politics or the psychology of anti-colonial resistance? Now, again, these three questions don't have to be all asked together. They could be three completely separate questions. And I recognize that these questions are fairly general right now, and it might be a little hard to grasp without an example, but don't worry, that example is coming. Also, think about what the text might reveal about the operations of cultural differences in shaping our perceptions of ourselves, others, and the world. I'll give you an example. This idea of race is a very modern one. It's created. We made it up. We made up race so that we could have racism. Those things become part of our perception. By referring to ourselves as white or black, we are part of that post-colonial mindset. How can race, religion, class, gender, sexual orientation, specific cultural beliefs, or custom combine to form your identity, and where do you fit within a hierarchy as that identity? Also, how might a text respond to or comment on characters, themes, or assumptions of a canonized colonialist work? Now, the canon, for those of you who don't know, C-A-N-O-N, is simply a body of work and authors that are considered to be representative of a culture. In our world, Shakespeare is considered part of the literary canon. Shakespeare, if you don't know, is a dead British white guy. That is part of the canon. So, how does Shakespeare's placement in the canon reflect a post-colonial world? Now, there are a lot of facets to post-colonialism. The first one, if you are taking on the mindset of a post-colonial critic, you're concerned with, first and foremost, any literature or works that are produced by colonial powers, as well as works that are produced by those who were colonized. We're going to be looking a lot at works that were produced by those who were colonized in the form of Language of Miracles and Things Fall Apart. These are works produced by people who were colonized. You're also going to be looking at how power, economics, politics, religion, and culture, how those elements work in relation to a colonial hegemony. Now, a colonial hegemony, for those of you who don't know, is simply a total society. Colonial hegemony is just total power over a society. Western colonizers control the colonized. For example, the Belgians went into the Congo, they took control of the Congo. They used not only physical force, but they also introduced monetary factors to hold over the people. They introduced religion in order to control the people. And they also deified Western religion and Western culture, and therefore made African religion and African culture seem tribal and primitive by comparison. These are all methods of control. You're also looking at works that exhibit a colonialist attitude, that is, a racist attitude. Now, here's where we get to our example. There's a novel some of you may have read. If you haven't read it, I recommend reading it in the same way I would recommend, looking at a picture of a car crash. It's not something you're gonna think, oh, it's beautiful. It's something you're gonna think, oh my God. And that's Robinson Crusoe. Robinson Crusoe is essentially guy who is in a shipwreck. He ends up on a deserted island. He's the only man on the island. There are no other human beings on the island. There's a bunch of black people on the island, but they aren't human. In fact, at various points, they don't exhibit language in the novel. And this is from the narration standpoint. They exhibit no language. They hoot and holler and they jump and they're naked and they have no shame, no Christian shame. And Robinson Crusoe manages to capture one of these colonized people, one of these people. And he colonizes him, he baptizes him, and he names him Friday. And wouldn't you know it, he baptizes him and he makes him a Christian, and Friday begins to learn the ability to speak. And he is so ashamed of his past. Oh, and how I was such a monster. I was not human until you came to me, Mr. Robinson Crusoe. Thank you for enslaving me. That is a colonialist attitude. So when we're looking at that text, this was a story that was written in the 1840s. We look at that text and we think, what does that tell us about the society that created it? Even what we would call a liberal view of minority experiences in the 1840s were that of, oh, they're quite primitive and we're better than them, and so therefore we shouldn't abuse being better than them. Whereas the more conservative viewpoint in those days was, we're better than them, and therefore let's show them how we're better than them. What is the role of the Western literary canon, and what colonial aspects are expressed? By that I mean, what role does, for example, capitalism have in the Western literary canon? What role does masculinity have? What role does Christianity have? What role does being white have in the canon? Basically, if you want to dumb it down a lot and get it absolutely right, think of this. Who is in charge? How are they staying in charge? When you look at any novel, who is the person treated most sympathetically? Who is the person treated most in charge? And why? If you as a writer are creating something, you are analyzing who is in charge of what you're looking at and why. The person in charge, are they in charge because they are white? Are they treated differently because they are white? Do we have the token black guy syndrome? That's another way of thinking about it. Look for issues not only of slavery and colonialist views, but also more subtle things. Ideas like taming the savage lands, or certain cultures being less civilized than others. We're seeing this a lot in the news, unfortunately, these days, where Middle Eastern cultures, Islam specifically, are treated as, oh, they're much less evolved than ours. That is a very colonialist attitude. And it's a very unhealthy colonialist attitude. It suggests, by creating that judgment of they are less evolved or less civilized, that we are somehow better than them because of who we are. Ask yourself this. One group of people, they come to another place. They take it over. How do the people who live in that place become changed, repressed, or eliminated as a process of colonization? Because that is very much what colonialism is. Colonialism as a force, as an economic and political force, was about people from Europe going to other places and taking over the land and subjugating the people that lived there. That's how America was created. America was very much a colonial creation. The Europeans came, they took the land from the people who lived there, they killed who they could, they subjugated who they could. I remember very specifically, for example, Native American boarding schools in the early 20th century as a method of control. Cut the hair, cut the culture, restrict the language, restrict the religion. You change the people without killing the people. They become part of the colonial system. We also have this a lot. If you look at advertisements, for example, of African American models, or the few that you can find in magazines, they're often airbrushed and made to look lighter. In fact, a couple years ago, Beyonce got very angry because she, in her greatness, and I mean that with absolutely no sarcasm, Beyonce's awesome, posed for a magazine and they airbrushed her. They made her skin look lighter, and she was mad because her blackness, in her perspective, I agree, is an issue to be treated as a positive thing. The fact that she has dark skin makes her no less beautiful than a person with white skin. The people native to a land have decided that having lighter skin is more attractive than darker skin, therefore airbrushing. Also, As a post colonial theorist, you are meant to understand and discuss how a dominating power looks down on and seeks to change repressed people. Now, I don't mean just the act of showing up and blowing things up, I mean long term. I mean, for example, the word that I'm thinking of right now is the word urban, which literally just means city, right? However, if you get thinking about it and you realize what urban means, what are the connotations of urban? The connotations of urban in 21st century America are horrifying. 21st century America takes the term urban to mean criminal, dangerous, black. Those three things together, and it's a very regressive point of view. If you are urban, you are therefore somehow more dangerous because you are black. In the mid 90s, there was this idea of the super predator, quote unquote, and yes, that was actually on the news. People, like, there were political figures saying urban super predators being created, and it was a very racist idea. It was a long-term thing. So let's examine, why is urban negative? Well, the reason urban is negative is because black people are living in urban environments. Okay, why do black people live in urban environments? Then we start to look back and we look at, for example, post-World War II. Post-World War II, big tracts of land available, GI Bills, soldiers coming home. They want a place to live. They can afford to live somewhere. Where do they choose to live? They choose to live in the suburbs, away from the city. Why do they choose to live away from the city? That's where the factories are. So as a result, in the city, property values dry up. They go real, real down. Who are the only people who can afford to live there? People of a minority descent. A lot of things that we take for granted in the modern day are a result of colonial attitudes. And that is what a post-colonial theorist looks at. You as a writer and you as a reader are thinking in terms of, in what way is the world that we're living in now, how is it created by this action of colonialism? Now, there are a lot of really great novels you can look at. There are a lot of really great texts you can look at. Some of them we'll be looking at in class, as well as a few things we'll be watching. But don't think that just because there's a positive spin that it's not a post-colonial. There is a short film called Invisible Children. Came out in 2008, 2009. And it's all about these four white guys who go to Ethiopia. There was a big thing going on, Coney 2012, if anybody happens to remember that when you were little kids. That came out of this. Big civil war. These people who come there, and they're very much the white saviors. These kids who have no education and no ability to escape, and these white guys are able to save the day for them, and it's nonsense. Post-colonialism is not about just saying, well, they're being treated in a positive way and they're humanized, so therefore it's okay. That's not exactly it. Anytime one group of people looks at another group of people as different or as other, that is where we begin to look at post-colonialism. Now, there are some caveats to this, and I know that some of my rhetoric kind of goes in the face of this, but you got to remember it's 8 in the evening and I'm just kind of doing this off the top of my head here. As a result, my language gets a little bombastic. The first big caveat when you're using post-colonial theory is that even though you are looking at this idea that history is written by the victors, it does not mean that you're looking to accuse everybody of being racist. Just because your neighbor uses the word urban, that doesn't mean your neighbors are racist. What that means is that you and your neighbor are a product of a series of historical events, a product of government rules and regulations that have created the conditions in which that is the meaning of the word. You're not judging people. That's kind of what I'm getting at. Just because you can dissect something from a post-colonial perspective, it does not mean that you are saying this author is a racist, or that person is a racist, or this person is better than another, because you're just falling into the same trap that the colonialists fell into centuries ago. Think about it like this. In the 60s and 70s, the idea of the first, second, and third world came up. They were constructed by those in power to describe themselves. The United States and Russia. It was used to describe themselves. We are first world powers. We are nuclear powers. Therefore, we are the dominant power. Anything less than us is lesser. Third world are the people who we deem as really bad. And now we get right down to it. What do we call third world countries? Well, they're predominantly African and East Asian nations. Nations that have a long, long history of the country was great, and then a bunch of white guys with guns showed up, shot the place up, and now they're dealing with the wreckage of it. Now we call them a third world country. We are no longer attacking them, but our language is attacking them. That doesn't make us racist. That doesn't, just because you use the word first world, second world, or third world, that doesn't mean you are a racist. That doesn't mean you can accuse somebody else of being a racist when they use it. It just means that there's been a reinforcement of the Western world as a dominant power that we have to examine. That is what this is about. It's about examining what is going on. It's not a condemnation of anybody. No party, no oppressor, no oppressed. In fact, 99 times out of 100, I will bet you that when you are looking at post-colonialism, you will find that not only is the oppressed group dehumanized, but you will also find that the oppressive group is dehumanized. It's a very interesting phenomenon. When Belgium shows up to the Congo and takes over the people of the Congo, not only are the people of the Congo dehumanized, but the oppressors who showed up are dehumanized. It's not condemning anybody. It's just analyzing how it happens and what it is. How is our world created?